Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am Hadar Suskind. I'm the president and CEO of Americans for Peace Now. I'm thrilled to have you all with us today. In just a minute, I will introduce our wonderful guests. But for those of you who are regulars, you know that this is the part where we play my favorite Washington game, filibuster for a minute until everybody has signed on. So again, thank you for being with us on what is actually a really gross, rainy, awful day here in Washington, D.C., but hopefully wherever you are, it's nicer than here. We got great numbers, folks signing up. I'm going to start us off actually before the intros and everything with just a little bit of housekeeping. So I remind everyone, first of all, that this webinar is being recorded and we will share it with everyone who is here, everyone who has signed up. So if you want to watch it again later or share it with other people, you will be able to do that. We will start and have some opening remarks from our colleagues here, but after that, as usual, we'll open it for questions and discussion. So again, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen and type your questions in. We will get to as many of them as we can. Of course, please keep them relevant to the conversation. The chat will not be active, so we're not using the chat, we're not using the hand raise. If you want to get in with a question, please use the Q&A function. So with that, I will say one more time, welcome everyone. Hello, we are so glad to have you with us. I'm Hadar Suskind, President and CEO of Americans for Peace Now, and I have with me today three friends who are wonderful guests, and I'm really excited to have them for this conversation. So first of all, Shaqued Morag from our colleagues in Israel from Shalom Achshav from Peace Now. Shaqued is the executive director. Jessica Montell, the executive director of Hamoked. And Avner Gvaryahu, the co-director, I think I got that right, of Breaking the Silence. So we're going to keep it short intros because I know that all of you who are with us today know Shaqued and know Jessica and know Avner and their great work. So we're going to jump right in. And what we are here to talk about is difficult. It's the frankly very difficult new reality that Shaqued and Jessica and Avner and many others are facing, which is the incoming Israeli government, which I'm sure everyone knows has now been announced. The coalition, partners were announced last night, and in their coalition agreements, some of that language is about how they are going to, basically attack civil society and attack particularly progressive Israeli organizations. We know this government is not even a return to the bad old days of previous Bibi governments. It's far worse than that. It's far more extreme than that in many, many ways that we can touch on. But one of them, I think, is a really explicit language that we've heard from some of the members and some of the partners. And they've gone after some of your organizations already and some of you by name. So there's a lot, and there's a lot to talk about and a lot to think about how to respond to that. So Shaqued, I'm going to come to you first and just, I think, throw the whole question open. What are you seeing? What are you most concerned about with this new government as it relates to how they're going to, how they're going to engage with Shalom Achshav and with other organizations in civil society?
Well, I'll start with a very general framing, because we haven't seen the full agreements yet, and some of the bills are just what we call goats that are going to be taken out afterwards, or just individual initiatives that might go forward or not. But the general atmosphere is that the West Bank is annexing us. We've been talking about annexation of the West Bank and denying it, but not only that the changes in authorities symbolize and pose a huge threat of actual annexation, but also the modus operandi of how they treat civil society is leaking already from the West Bank towards Israel, and we already see how the way that they treat civilians, the way that police treats Arabs and protesters and whoever that is making their work a bit harder, They're importing already the standards and the way the actions that they allow themselves to perform. They imported from the occupied territories into Israel. We've seen, for example, last week confiscation of Palestinian flags and arrests of activists that were holding them in Haifa, inside Israel. That's after it's been a long time, but more intensively in the last few months, they've been confiscating flags in the West Bank, in Hawara, in East Jerusalem. I think that once we have ministers that are from the settlements, and not generally from settlements, but the most extreme ones. We're going to have 2 ministers from Hebron. This morning I've talked to Michael Sfard. He said it's a settlement that is smaller than a normal kibbutz, and we don't recall any time in history that a single kibbutz had 2 ministers in the government. So this tiny settlement is going to be represented by 2 ministers in the government, and it's not only that they will change the law in a way that will prevent us from acting. They are bringing with them the general perception of who should and shouldn't be allowed to speak, who should and shouldn't be able to meet with soldiers, with students, with school students, who should or shouldn't be able to go into universities and schools, TV channels, newspapers. What seems today protected by law can be very easily changed, not only by legislation, but also by general approach, let's say, that sends the message that it's better not to let us have the state and have the right to speak. And I've mentioned the media. We must remember that the media has already changed a lot, and some of the changes might also cement this change. Reporters from what used to be Channel 20 and is now Channel 14 are already in more mainstream media. This channel is becoming mainstream. Netanyahu is threatening to close the public channel. And the way that the media frames our activities, our messaging, our people even, our title, the title that is given to us, you can see Peace Now. The same report will call us an extreme left organization in let's say Atar Srugim, website of the Tzionut Datit, of the religious Zionism, and we will be called the political movement of the Zionist left on Iton Haaretz, Haaretz newspaper or website. So once the more the voice of the extreme right becomes stronger and more mainstream, this will frame us differently. We will be less, I'm sure, less invited and less welcomed in places that try to see themselves as centrist or as non-political. We've experienced that back in 2015 government. And one last thing that I will mention, and then I'll give the stage to Avner that will come up, I guess, with more concrete examples. But one thing that is already mentioned that they're intending to do is to try and limit our sources of funding. It's already happened in 2015 when they forced us to announce once we are supported by foreign governments. Now they claim that they are going to forbid it. If you look very deeply into the legislation, it says they'll forbid funding from states that Israel is not having relations with, but it's already framed as if whatever foreign funding will be forbidden and limited. And again, even if it won't stop us from doing what we're doing, it will mark us in different colors and less legitimized ones. That's for now.
Thank you, Shaqued. Avner, I want to come to you next, and I want your broad view on any of these pieces, but also just in thinking about Hebron and what we've already seen with the actions of some of the soldiers there and how they are treating people from breaking the silence in particular, but from the left overall, and how does that feel to you like this new incoming government is empowering that in a different way also?
So hi, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think this is a really important conversation. I think it's so important that I'm holding myself from what's happening in the other room right now, which is a Hanukkah party with my mother-in-law's latkes and fondue, which is known throughout Jerusalem. But it's really good to be with you guys. Hebron, I think that as Shaqued mentioned, the entire reality for Palestinians first and foremost, and for human rights organizations, human rights defenders, those Israelis and internationals trying to stand with and for Palestinian rights, is going to be more under assault. Like everything Shaqued mentioned till now, let's remind ourselves, is still under the previous government, right? We've been seeing this shrinking space reality also under this last government, with ministers from labor, ministers from Meretz, who in some cases tried to curb some of these phenomenons, in many places didn't try enough or didn't try at all. And in the end of the day, we found ourselves exactly where we were heading for a very long time. I think what we saw in Hebron over the last couple of weeks, maybe even months, is definitely something that those of us who have been in the city, feeling the atmosphere, felt even before the results of the election, but definitely emboldened by the Ben Gvir phenomenon, right? And as Shaqued mentioned, 2 MKs out of 120 who reside in Hebron and have for many years been main actors in the city. This emboldens a lot of the action. So definitely a shift in sort of the actions of the settlers. That's something that we've been feeling over the last couple of weeks. But I think what unfolded a few weeks ago, the weekend after Jews around the world read about the Shabbat Chayei Sarah, was a very telling moment. And for those of you listening that didn't follow all the details, what happened in Shabbat Chayei Sarah in Hebron, it was nothing less than a pogrom. I mean, this is such a hard word to use, but that's what happened. There were 30,000 Jews who came to visit the city for the weekend, right? Sort of the settlers of Hebron's Woodstock, if you'd like, or Burning Man. And basically, there was violent attacks that started really with the beginning of the weekend, like starting Friday. And these attacks continued throughout the weekend. In some cases, 30 to 40, some case masked, in some case not, settlers attacked Palestinian families. And this was more extreme even than what we've known in the past. And a weekend afterwards, a group of Israelis, many of them actually ultra-Orthodox and religious, came to support Palestinians in solidarity, right? In my book, nothing more Jewish, nothing more moral, and also nothing more should be nothing more Israeli than that, to go and support families under attack. And they were basically not only detained and harassed by soldiers, but eventually one of these activists was beaten up. Some of the videos are online. You can find them. Just Google, Hebron, and the last things you'll find are definitely that. And what happened in that junction, by the way, it's the same junction that Elor Azaria shot and killed the Palestinian, a very famous case, a very tense place. What unfolded there was something that, for us who visit Hebron regularly, was surprising, because it's not that all the soldiers love what we do. It usually takes a while for them, those of them that will break their silence, to come and speak with us. But while they're there, we're a nuisance. But the fact that they not only start this confrontation with the group, but then detained and later on, beat up this activist, really shows how they're emboldened by the Ben Gvir doctrine. And that is something that is already affecting Palestinians. The soldier who beat up the activist, afterwards, I learned this, was pretty known to the Palestinians living in Tel Romeda as this aggressive soldier. So this translates into how Palestinians are treated, but also a general atmosphere for activists in the city itself. And I think that part of what we're trying to anticipate and see how we address it or prepare ourselves is what's going to unfold in the city and what's going to happen there, and will at some point will they close off the city. And I think something a few of us were talking about this actually in a meeting this morning. I think part of what could be an outcome of this government is, we're constantly trying to expose realities, right, and break silences and talk about realities on the ground. But it very much might be that with this new government, we'll see a much more proactive measures to prevent internationals from entering specific places, or generally the West Bank. Journalists, activists, and I think that makes this moment and this conversation of all of us together so much more important, right? And making sure that the information keeps flowing, that we continue talking about the reality. And I'll end by saying a headline that I saw today in Israel Hayom, right? Israel Today, the right-wing newspaper. The front page was basically some sort of signal from the U.S. to this new Israeli government about not giving visas to violent settlers, which was something that was on the radar for a very long time. And I think that one of the things that this government will fear is exactly the work that all of us here are doing. Is this kind of conversation, sharing information, exposing realities, talking about settler violence and settlement expansion and the violence of the occupation. So I think, Hebron is a place to definitely look at, not because it's out of the ordinary, but because it tells such an important story about what's happening in other places as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Avner. The story you just mentioned about, the U.S. considering not giving visas to those suspected of being part of violent attacks. First of all, I shared it this morning. It's a big deal. It is a big deal. On the other hand, when I shared it, I wrote, U.S. considering treating Israel like all other countries, right? Because it actually shouldn't be a big deal. Like, that's literally American policy. It's not American policy for everything except for Israel, but that's often been the way it actually plays out. One little side note, and I'm going to share this private thing on a video that's being recorded and we're going to put out publicly, but it is being referred to, at least among certain people here in Washington, as the Ben Gvir rule, right? Because while it is stated as a general, and they think they mean it could apply to anyone, there is literally a question as to whether Ben Gvir would be himself granted a US visa should he seek to come here, which my guess is Netanyahu is smart enough to try to keep Ben Gvir from finding out the answer to that question, but we shall see. With that, Jessica, I want to turn to you. So much of your work is engaging directly, interfacing directly with Palestinians, trying to help them navigate the, intentionally Byzantine processes of the occupation and all the bureaucracy around that. So, Avner was talking about, and Shaqued was touching on also, issues around violence and delegitimization of the left. But what about what they could just literally do to your work and your day-to-day ability to do that?
Yes. First, it's great to be here and to see such interest and engagement on these issues. It's clear that the new government will result in a very severe deterioration for Palestinian human rights and a real threat to the ability of those who defend Palestinians to be able to do our work. And I don't think there are a lot of secrets. They've been very open. I mean, the coalition negotiations, the agreements between Netanyahu and the coalition partners, all of these figures we know for months and years what their agenda is. So on the one hand, we have a lot of information to be preparing for what's to come. That doesn't necessarily make it easier. So, I mean, I would flag Bezalel Smotrich, who now they are passing laws that he would be the second minister within the defense ministry. Specifically, his coalition agreement states that he would be in charge of the civil administration and appointing the head of the civil administration. And much of the focus around that, the civil administration is actually an arm of the Israeli military, responsible for civilian affairs. So, of course, he's concerned about settlements and legalizing outposts, setting up new settlements, infrastructure, funding, support, expansion of settlements. All of that is part of the job of the civil administration. But most of the civil administration, in fact, is dealing with Palestinians. And this has really been lost sight of in all of the talk around the Smotrich law. The whole permit bureaucracy, Palestinians who need a permit to build a house in Area C, but Palestinians throughout the entire West Bank who want to move from place to place between the West Bank and Gaza, to enter Jerusalem or Israel, to cross the separation wall to get access to their lands on the other side. I mean, everything you need a permit from the civil administration, who now is going to be headed by, the person who has spent most of their career restricting Palestinian development in Area C and expanding settlements there. So it's quite blatant and extreme what his agenda is. And then, the flip side of that also, as you said, the ability of us to be doing our work. And Avner started to talk about this. Anything that has been even a little bit effective, they are going to target. So the ability of solidarity activists to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. The ability of us to be challenging their actions in the Israeli courts. And we know that they have marked, the courts as a site of opposition to them. I mean, absurdly considering the courts to be left-wing and very interventionist in terms of restricting Israeli government and military policy. Although we know, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, Hamoked is probably the organization with the biggest caseload in terms of petitions to all levels of the Israeli judiciary. Now, we're winning a lot of cases, but, not the big important cases. I mean, this morning we were in the Supreme Court challenging a punitive home demolition. It's clear we will lose that petition before we even set foot in the courtroom. So it's not at all the case that the court is, tying the hands of the military or the government. And yet this rhetoric around having to restrain the courts. So, how will they go about both appointing judges that are aligned with their ideology and also passing laws that restrict who can petition the court, under what circumstances, what the courts can rule on. All of those questions. And I think for me, there are two, the sort of broader implications of this government, of all sorts of forces that we are familiar with. And it's really important to point out that this past year has been terrible for Palestinian human rights. I mean, maybe the worst in a decade or two when it comes to really all of the parameters. The numbers of deaths and injuries of Palestinians, the numbers of Palestinians in administrative detention, settlement expansion, settler violence, not being restrained. And that has been confusing for a lot of people, to have a government where you have Meretz and the Labor Party as part of the government, and yet the reality on the ground has been so terrible for Palestinians. All of those forces are only going to be heightened. And I think both in terms of the shaping of the narrative, and on the one hand, you have these very radical forces that will be encouraged and magnified, and a self-censorship on the part of, whole sectors of society that don't want to, risk infuriating, being in the sights of these people. I mean, in terms of the, Shaqued gave the example of what is peace now and how you can frame peace now. What is so clear to me in all of the conversations around Area C, that let's say the journalists that in parentheses to explain what is Area C, they say those parts of the West Bank under complete Israeli control. No, the West, it's not under the control of the Israeli Knesset or the Israeli government. The West Bank is under complete Israeli military control, but already this shaping of the narrative that actually Area C of the West Bank is ours, is Israel's. All along we have had that battle, let's say, over the narrative, and that only is going to increase, that sort of entrenchment, not only of the policies, but of how we are allowed to talk about all of these issues. I mean, whether occupation is a factual legal term to describe Israeli military control over the West Bank, or occupation is some radical, expresses a radical political agenda to call the West Bank under Israeli military occupation. And then the second issue that I want to flag, this sort of self-censorship. Israelis are afraid, and for good reason. I mean, a broad section of Israelis, let's say mainstream, as it is, nobody wants to identify as being left. Left has a very negative connotation for the majority of Israelis. And then you think about judges that are dependent on this government for promotion, civil servants, journalists, public figures. I mean, everyone that then is undertaking some sort of calculus about how to weather this government. And of course, that is scary for, well, precisely at the time that everyone needs to stand up. I mean, everyone really needs at this point to stand up. A lot of people are not going to be willing to take the personal risk that standing up is going to require.
Thank you. So I want to remind everybody who's with us that if you've got questions, you can use the Q&A function. And we'll go through and get to as many of them. Before I go to some of the questions, I just want to see Shaqued or Avner. Is there anything else that came up in the conversation that you want to respond to or add to? Maybe Shaqued first. If not, I can go to questions. That's fine.
Sorry, you want me to address the questions?
No. I was saying before I start asking all the questions, was there anything that either Avner said or Jessica said that you wanted to speak to?
No. I think they covered the entire thing. No, at the moment, no. Thank you.
Okay, then I'm gonna go start taking some of the questions here. And again, some of these I'm gonna smush together in a couple of different ways because there are a lot of them that that speak to the same questions. So, actually, Jessica, what you were just talking about, how are people going to stand up and who's going to be willing to take those personal risks? So we know that's true of people like the three of you who lead civil society organizations. We're also seeing the push now for, around educators in terms of what's going on with education in the country and asking people to stand up there. But one big area and one big question mark that I can say, for me, as somebody who served in the IDF now quite a long time ago, is frankly a terrifying question, is how is the military going to respond to this? And how is the military going to respond to the new political leadership? And also specifically, right, there's a new religious IDF chief of staff. And do we think that the military, both in terms of its rules of engagement, how it treats Palestinians, but also how it treats Israeli citizens and how it engages around things like, Avner, what you were talking about in Hebron, do we think that's going to change? What are the questions and concerns around that? And Avner, I'll start with you on this, and anybody else who wants to weigh in, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a real question. I mean, both the military and the police and other different institutions, it's sort of an interesting and weird and maybe even funny for those of us following or in this battle for a while, sort of many of us have been sort of, or our camp has been challenging the institutions for many years, and now it's sort of, we're looking to the institutions to save us, right? Will the military be strong enough to stand the political changes? Will the police be strong enough? So I think we have, in order to be able to pass these 4 years better than where we are now, maybe less, maybe more, I don't know, but to pass and utilize this moment, we have to be honest. And if we're honest definitely about the military, we have to know, we have to be frank that the settlement movement has been, you could say, has been using, or you could say has been working with various elements of the various institutions, but definitely the Israeli military, right? There, Jessica mentioned the civil administration, and we'll be happy to share sort of a short document that some of us put together around sort of the coalition agreement and sort of the real intentions of the religious Zionists of Smotrich and Netanyahu, and sort of what they're planning to do within the civil administration. We just published a report a few months ago detailing what the civil administration is, and dozens of testimonies of soldiers serving in the civil administration in recent years. The civil administration is not a body that's there to deal with the civilian aspects of Palestinian lives. It's another arm of control. It's there to maintain our control over Palestinians. It's true that they have different elements and aspects and things that have to do with civilian lives, but it's all in that prism. So, and I'm saying that just when we try to look at what might happen within the military, we have to understand that the military has been used by the settlement movement or is working with the settlement movement for many, many years. And this will obviously go to a whole new level. So I don't think we can look to the military to stop this. We might see moments of sort of trying to hold on to some of the sort of military ethos, or to hold on to specific elements that are dear to the military. But in terms of the ability to push back on political pressure, I think if there's something that we've seen throughout the years is that part of the reality of the Israeli occupation and the military occupation is that the military is not built to deal with political pressure, right? They know how to deal with Palestinian protests or Palestinian violence, right? That's what they're built to do. They know how to go to war, right? That's what the military does. They know how, there's all kinds of things militaries know how to do. What the military does not know how to do, and it is not built to do, is deal with political pressure. And we've seen this throughout the years. You know, some members of parliament that represented Meretz in recent elections, there are, you know, stories of them as high-ranking officers and them being pressured by the settlers to do things that don't align with their political ideology. And I think when that was true 10, 15, 20 years ago, this will definitely be true when not only Ben Gvir will have power, but let's not forget that the Likudniks' ideology, right, the Bibi's ideology, in many cases isn't that far, right? Yoav Gallant is probably going to be the Minister of Defense, right? He's not a member of Peace Now, right? I mean, in that sense, the entire system is going through a very dramatic change, and I think that especially because of that, like understanding where we are, right? That sort of a shift that has been going on for many, many years of strengthening the center right and the far right, or sort of the apartheid camp or the, you know, forever occupation camp. We have to understand that the addition of Smotrich and Ben Gvir is up the stream, right, and not against the stream. Maybe that's, I'll end with that.
So
Yeah.
maybe I'll just jump in to add, because I think what is different is the removal of the mask, and both the Ben Gvir, the coalition agreements for Ben Gvir, politicizing the police in an explicit way that has never been the case before. That the commissioner of the police is now directly, answers to the most extremist of the ministers, and also Smotrich, that again, he will be appointing the head of the civil administration and the head of COGAT, the coordinator for government activity in the territories. So again, that it is explicit that somebody with that ultra nationalist agenda is politicizing these bodies. And in some ways, that's an opportunity for us. I mean, again, this confusion of a terrible government doing terrible things, that is a coalition including left-wing politicians, which has in some ways stymied also the international community. And you saw very clearly the way that Europe and the United States were unwilling to do anything that would undermine this previous government over this past year. So the fact that a lot of trends that we have been warning about, that have been, somewhat submerged, that have been not explicit, now everything is clear and explicit. There is no illusion about this government, about who are the people who are given unprecedented powers. I mean, powers that the exact same minister in the last government did not have. So that mask being removed is an opportunity if all of us, and that definitely includes, the international community, the US administration, has to be able to seize that opportunity to respond appropriately.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you said that European governments, the US governments didn't want to push too hard. I mean, for the last few years, that's what we heard when we met with Biden administration officials, when we met with senior leaders in Congress. We got over and over again, when Bennett and or Lapid were in power, well, we can't push too hard because the government there is so fragile, and if it falls apart, we're going to get a horrible right-wing government. Well, we all know where we sit today. I will say, having spent this last holiday week here in DC, as it's been, with the opportunity to be at a number of different congressional receptions and White House events and talk to some of these senior people, I do think there is an understanding in Washington that this is different. And the conversation I have had with senators this week, with senior White House people this week, was saying, we, all of us, including those political leaders, need to be prepared to think about and talk about and do things that we haven't done in the past, and things that we were not necessarily willing to do, or at least they were not willing to do in the past because they were uncomfortable, but that this is a different reality. And, it's going to, as everybody on this call knows, or the Zoom knows, that's going to take some time to actualize, but there were a lot of shaking heads. And I think there really is an understanding that things are different and require some different responses. Shaqued, I want to come to you with a different kind of question, actually, and we'll come back to what the US should do and more policy. But one of the questions that's actually come up in the Q&A spot a few times in different ways, and then people have asked me as we're preparing to bring an APN group to Israel and Palestine soon, is, are you actually personally afraid, concerned for your safety? I mean, Avner talked a little bit before about activists being, beaten up, attacked by police. All of you are literally out there on the front lines. How do you feel about that?
So the short answer is yes. It's frightening, and I've become a mother during this year, and I am less willing to expose myself to risky situations, of course. And it's frightening when the police that is supposed to defend you might pose another threat of violence. Of course, the soldiers' violence is something that we haven't experienced much before, and this is new to us as well. But I must say that, in terms of violence, the whole issue, that what brings us to the political activity that we're doing is violence that we're trying to prevent. So we don't have the privilege to avoid activity and avoid going out there. And if we're absent, things are going to change in our absence. We must be there one way or another. And our reaction is the opposite. In the face of violence, we should bring more and more Israelis that support the two-state solution in our case, and that oppose occupation and that oppose violence, to bring them to the ground. And at some point, they will not be able to call everybody anarchists. It's so absurd that it was delivered as okay to attack the Bnei Avraham group in Hebron because they are anarchists. Whoever knows them knows that they are far from that definition. And when we bring more and more Israelis that are, let's say, not anarchists, I hope that it will minimize some of the violence. And again, we don't have an alternative. We don't, if we don't meet this violence there, we'll meet there the next clash between Palestinians and Israelis, one way or another, inside Israel or in the West Bank. Or, I personally truly don't believe that the policy of this government will keep us more safe than the previous governments, or of course than a peace agreement. So they use the excuse of personal security, but in fact we are all going to be exposed to more and more violence in Israel, not only out there in the territories. So no, in this in this climate, violence becomes something more casual that has less effect on activists, unfortunately. But when you use your weapon, you make it. You normalize it. So the other side's weapon. When they use violence on us, you could see it in Balfour protest. When the police used water guns on protesters, it brought more protesters, because in the face of violence, people can visualize and understand the threat. It's not vague anymore. You can witness it, you can sense it. So I mean, in a way, it might even make us stronger. Hopefully.
Hopefully, indeed. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. We've got 15 minutes. I've got a couple topics I still want to hit. So one question that's come up in a few questions here is sort of, I phrase it as the what now. And so there's some questions about, what now? Is there, new political parties and movements on the horizon to respond to this? What now? Is there new movement, collective movement organizing on the horizon responding to this? And also specifically, is there any growing movement among, young people refusing to serve? So I would say, I'm looking at all that, or what are the responses that you think we are seeing, or hopefully will see from the progressive side? And I know that's big and broad, so there's a lot of different pieces that we can put in there, but maybe Avner, I'll come to you first with that.
So, sort of in King's phrases, right? Phrases that like, where do we go from here, right? I think it's a title of one of his books and famous speeches, like, where do we go from here? And I think that the first thing that we are going to see is trying to embolden, strengthen, build, see how strong the house that we built is, right? Because many of us, I think since 2015-16, with the last wave of sort of very aggressive attacks on many of us, I'm sure this is true also to Jessica and Shaqued. I would say that personally, when I started my role as director and later on co-director, a lot of what we were thinking about was how do we prepare our house, right, our organization, our community for the storm, right? And you don't know how strong your house is till the storm hits. So we're about to see how strong the house is that we built. And I think that is going to be a very big element. But I think that through that, we will also see what emerges. Because to your question, there's a lot of ideas out there and a lot of feelings of, a very clear feeling. I think probably one of the strongest and most important feelings is the sort of the lack of political outlet that we're in, a sort of political catastrophe. It's not only the demise of Meretz, right? It's a weakening of labor. It's the split of the joint list. In the end, a lot of what organizations and movements can do, and many see sort of the civil society organizations as an alternative to the political sphere. That is wrong, right? It cannot be an alternative. It has to be part of a puzzle. And I think at this point, that's the biggest thing that we don't have. Because it's not that there are, if you look at the numbers, the same amount of center left or lefties, they didn't disappear. The people are still here, right? And there's a big energy of people that feel they don't have, not only they don't have a voice, but now that they're under attack. And there's an interesting moment here where my brother-in-law works in sort of a pluralistic branch of sort of Jewish education that has joint projects with the Ministry of Education. Just spoke with him a couple of days ago, and I said, "Are you guys worried? Like, you think you're on the radar?" And he was like, I don't think so. So he just texted me like, "Oh, we're on the radar. We're on the blacklist." I think it's something that it creates a moment, and this moment is true for us here. It's also true for you guys there. But I think that part of what we do see is a lot of a moment of organizing and people coming together from places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I think that from that, I hope that we will also see more opportunities for may be a political outcome. I saw one of the questions talked about new party or a party that's coming up. I don't think it's there yet. There's a lot of ideas, but I think that it's a bit too early to sort of understand that. And there's at least 2 to 4 years that we have to deal with this. So I actually think the right thing to do is to understand who we are, what the camp is, how we fight back, and then think of sort of the next steps in that sense.
Gotcha. So one of the other things that I want to throw to all three of you is, the question we have been mostly talking, obviously, in this conversation about Israeli, Jewish Israeli civil society organizations. Can you tell us, are there efforts to strengthen cooperation with Palestinian civil society organizations, whether that's, Palestinian citizens of Israel or West Bank Palestinians? Maybe Jessica, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, and the issue that I wanted to raise throughout this conversation is about privilege and the shifting identities around privilege that we're going to see with this new government. And it has been very clear up till now. I mean, the risks I take, what I expect from the police and the military in terms of their treatment of me, even as somebody who is speaking out in protest, who is taking action to be challenging them. Still, it has always been very clear, I think, for all of us on this call, as Jewish Israelis, we benefit from a privilege that Palestinians under occupation cannot do the same things that we do with the same level of safety, and Palestinian citizens of Israel also. So this sort of hierarchy is going to be undermined to some extent. And on the one hand, I think all of us that have a level of privilege need to be standing in solidarity with people that are more vulnerable. But I think new categories of people, I mean, the blacklist, as was referred to, and apparently there is such a list, with names and organizations that these extremist ministers have already prepared. And it's not just us who are already used to being on their blacklist, but LGBTQ activists and, the reform movement that is also enemy number one for this government. So this past year, when you had attacks on Palestinian human rights and civil society organizations, it was very important that Israelis stand in solidarity with them. I mean, the criminalization of Palestinian organizations, the fact that Il-Haq and other well-respected human rights organizations were called terrorist organizations and are threatened with being shut down, that we are not cowed by that, again, that attempt to change the narrative and stand with them. And I think then that is the test for, it's a whole assembly line that everyone has to support, the people in front of them that are being subjected to attack. I mean, that's how we see, as Avner said, how strong our house is, who stands, who's willing to stand with us. And of course, the risk is mitigated the more that it's shared among all of us. I mean, that's, the more everybody steps up. And there are people, there's a little bit of a phenomenon here of the dog catching the car. And not everyone who voted for all of the parties that are coming into power are happy with the most extremist elements that are being given powers that not everyone wants them to have. So, I mean, again, there are opportunities to be expanding the community of people who speak up, who support others that are vulnerable and under attack. And of course, the major alliance that has to be built is between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. I mean, both in terms of the political organizing that has to happen as the political alternative to this government, and also in civil society where you have already strong bonds, but those have to be really invested in and made stronger.
So thank you. I want to ask, and Shaqued, I'm going to come to you with this first. a question about one more part of the broad coalition, which is actually the diaspora Jewish community, and particularly, obviously, in our case, the American Jewish community. There are lots of examples that all of us could list over the past years where US government pressure and US Jewish communal displeasure has had an impact on the Israeli government. Right now, people here are terrified in the American Jewish community that this government is basically saying we don't care. And we're seeing, not just, like you're saying, not just the usual suspects, not just us, we're seeing Abe Foxman come forward and say, oh, maybe his support for Israel is conditional. Now, of course, his condition has nothing to do with treatment of Palestinians or treatments of Israeli civil society. It's about, defining who is a Jew. But the reform movement, as you mentioned, people like Abe Foxman, Tom Friedman, other folks who have not been, as Shaqued was saying, the anarchist left, are coming forward and expressing their concern, and so far feel like they're getting, nothing back from this incoming government. So I guess the question part in this is, do you think this government is going to care about the voice of the American Jewish community? And then the thing I want all of us to kind of end with is going beyond the American Jewish community, the actual American political voice. How much do we think they're going to care about that? Because obviously that's where we spend our time, and there are a lot of things where I think there are opportunities for that. But it's a big question that a lot of people here are asking. So Shaqued, I'll start with you and then we'll go around.
Thank you. First, I must say that the turnout to this event shows that there is interest among the Jewish community abroad, and that we must strengthen this collaboration. I think that first, what has already happened in Israel is that the Israeli wider opposition camp, that was represented generally by the last government and is now becoming opposition, is starting to understand that there is a strong link between the different threats that the new government poses. You cannot just just defend, let's say, women's rights or LGBTQ rights, or separation of state and religion, or freedom in education, and ignore the occupation, or ignore the racism against the Arab society in Israel. It's all linked, and those values on the right wing, as I said, they came from the same source back in the most extremist settlements in the West Bank. And I really hope that this link can strengthen abroad as well, because our impression is that sometimes it's easier to recruit the diaspora around the Judaism issues rather than the questions of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because then you can split around the, let's say, vision and solutions, and two-state solution, one-state solution. And if we agree that the occupation is a major threat, and regardless the solution, we should unite and object it, and object the new steps of annexation that will prevent any solution, I think that's the most urgent understanding that must be shared among all active Jewish communities abroad. And also, if we talked about us, civil society in Israel, being threatened and delegitimized, I believe that strong support from mostly the Jewish communities in the States will give us a strong back. I mean, it's easy for them to say that we are agents of foreign governments from Europe, and of course, when it's Germany, some of the right-wingers have some more criticism. But once we are supported by the Jewish community in the States, it gives us more legitimacy. It means that we represent the Jewish people, not only the Israeli left. We come from Jewish values. We are driven by the same feelings. And I think I can't stress enough how important the role of the Jewish community abroad is and will be in the future. And I'm sure also that even if some of the extreme right belittles the importance of the connections between the US and Israel, Netanyahu will not harm it so easily. And it can be a front that that will distract or will prevent some of the harm. So thanks again for being with us tonight and for being interested.
Okay, I want to go, Jessica, and then Avner, just a minute or so each. We're running past, but closing thoughts that you want to share with folks.
Yeah, so I jump on in terms of, I mean, let's focus on what, for this audience, the U.S. Jewish community and the U.S. administration. This government will make noises much less responsive to criticism and concerns from the American Jewish community and from the U.S. administration. They perhaps don't, all of them, understand how dependent Israel is on those communities, economically, diplomatically, in all sorts of ways. There is a huge and diverse toolbox. All of those settlements have friends of organizations fundraising in the United States, enjoying tax-exempt donations. How long is that going to continue? I mean, one tiny example, again, of what I think is a very diverse toolbox that can and should be used to make clear to this government that benefits come because of shared values and a behavior in line with international expectations. I mean, this government takes for granted all of the benefits of the relationship with Europe and still has, the nerve to be saying that Europe is hostile to Israel, when, of course, the United States government and European Union, all of the member states, the best friend that Israel has, and really that the link between privileges and behavior and shared values has to be made much more clear.
Avner.
A short anecdote. When Netanyahu started his last government that was seen as the most right-wing government in the history of Israel, when Shaqued was Minister of Justice and Bennett and so on, that was one of the moments when Netanyahu was in conversations with Noni Moses, right, who was the publisher of Yediot Ahronot. Some of these conversations leaked, right, as part of the indictments against Netanyahu and the back and forth. And there was a moment there that I think is important, especially in this crowd, where Noni Moses asks Netanyahu, aren't you scared of the pressure or the criticism of the world as you're forming this right-wing government? And Netanyahu answers, the world doesn't matter. There's only one country that matters. And that's the US. And Netanyahu didn't change his mindset. If there's something you can say of Netanyahu, he's the same Netanyahu, who has been throughout his political career. And in that sense, the importance of making your voices heard, your communities, your rabbis, your synagogues, speaking to your elected officials is so important at this point. And I really agree with Jessica. It's not necessarily as if the government will respond automatically, but they are paying attention. And also something to remember, there will be a day after this government. It's important to continue to build those ties and bridges for the day after.
That's right. Wonderful. Thank you for those closing thoughts, Avner. Jessica, thank you. Shaqued, For those of you who asked, we had over 225 people who were on with us today. So I appreciate each and every one of you. I appreciate you for being here today and for all of your support. I will take this year-end opportunity to urge you to please continue that support for APN and for our colleagues and friends. We can't do this work without you. So thank you all, and we will see you soon. Goodbye.